It's February 21st here in Seoul, and I'm Kim Dami. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour. Starting with the South Korean leader's impeachment trial over his martial law declaration. The Constitutional Court has decided to hold the very final hearing of President Yoon Suk-yeol's impeachment trial next Tuesday. And that last session raises the likelihood a verdict will be delivered in mid-March. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy and the US-Ukraine envoy ended their talks about ending the Ukraine war without a press conference that was supposed to follow their meetup. Instead, Zelenskyy wrote on his Telegram channel that Thursday's meeting was a good conversation with a lot of details. South Korea plans to impose anti-dumping tariffs of up to 38% on Chinese thick steel plates after discovering their potential damage to South Korea's domestic industry. A decision that follows the Trump administration's 25% tariffs on all steel and aluminum imports starting in March. The Constitutional Court will wrap up President Yoon's impeachment case after 11 hearings. The president will deliver his closing statement at a session next Tuesday, and it's expected the court will deliver a verdict in mid-March. Our Oh Soo-young has the details.
President Yoon Suk-yeol's impeachment trial will conclude next Tuesday with his final statement at the Constitutional Court. The court announced Thursday at Yoon's 10th trial hearing that the next and final session would be held on February 25th, some 74 days after the impeachment vote passed at the National Assembly. The bench will review remaining evidence before the National Assembly's legal team and the president's lawyers each make their closing arguments. Then the Assembly's panel co-chair Chung Chung-nae and President Yoon will deliver their final remarks. The court on Thursday held the last round of witness examinations.
The questions focused on whether the president went through proper cabinet procedures before declaring martial law and whether he'd ordered arrests of key politicians and judicial figures.
First up was Prime Minister Han Duck-soo, who said there had been anomalies in procedure and substance compared to a standard cabinet meeting. He said the defense minister had not consulted him before recommending martial law to the president, as required by the constitution, and said no minutes were taken. Han stopped short of judging whether or not a legitimate cabinet meeting took place, saying that should be determined through investigative and judicial procedures. Former National Intelligence Service Deputy Director Hong Jang-won, who was a witness earlier this month, returned for further questioning by Yoon's legal team. Hong previously testified that he'd made note of 14 to 16 figures to arrest under martial law, claiming that he'd written it in the night outside the residence of his boss, Director Cho Tae-yong. He received the names from Defense Counterintelligence Commander Yoon, who Hong phoned as the president had told him to help out the commander. But Hong changed his words on Thursday, saying he had been in his office after all. His boss told the court last week that Hong had lied about his whereabouts, citing CCTV footage. As Hong and Yoon's lawyers clashed over the veracity of his note, which was reproduced and altered various times, the president spoke out, saying the debate misses the point. He said he'd called Hong to encourage him to work with Yoon hunting down spies without mentioning martial law. He pointed out that Hong was the one who called the commander, made notes, and then held on to them until he was dismissed from the NIS. National Police Agency Chief Cho Ji-ho also stood witness after 2 absences due to illness. He refused to answer most questions due to his own criminal case, but said he testified truthfully to prosecutors. Cho had said Yoon called him 6 times on December 3rd and told him to arrest lawmakers. Based on past presidential impeachment trials, a verdict is likely to be reached within 2 weeks around March 11th. Former President Park Geun-hye's impeachment was upheld in 11 days, while former President Roh Moo-hyun's was dismissed in 14 days. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
The Ukrainian president met with Trump's U.S. envoy for Ukraine to discuss the ongoing war. Though their scheduled joint press conference was called off at Washington's request amid rising tensions over ending the war. Our Choi Min-jung reports.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy and U.S.-Ukraine envoy Keith Kellogg met in Kyiv on Thursday and held what Zelenskyy called a productive meeting. Zelenskyy shared on social media that they had a detailed conversation about the battlefield situation, the return of Ukrainian prisoners of war, and effective security guarantees, emphasizing the importance of U.S.-Ukraine relations. However, the meeting did not result in significant breakthroughs in securing U.S. support, as evidenced by the cancellation of a planned joint press conference at the request of the U.S. What was supposed to be a media event turned into a brief photo opportunity without remarks or questions. Kellogg's visit to Kyiv came amid escalating tensions between U.S. President Donald Trump and Zelenskyy. On Wednesday, Ukraine rejected U.S. demands for $500 billion in minerals as repayment for wartime aid, citing inadequate support from Washington and a lack of security guarantees. Trump's frustration with Zelenskyy is apparent, as he believes Zelenskyy has not taken advantage of the opportunities presented.
Look, President Trump is obviously very frustrated right now with President Zelenskyy. The fact that he hasn't come to the table, that he hasn't been willing to take this opportunity that we have offered. I think he eventually will get to that point, and I hope so very quickly.
Additionally, the U.S. is resisting putting the blame on Russia for the war by opposing the inclusion of Russian aggression in a G7 joint statement marking the war's third anniversary. This follows Trump's comments blaming Ukraine for the war and calling Zelenskyy a dictator without elections. He has also proposed inviting Russia back to the G7. Next week, Trump is set to meet with the leaders of France and the UK to discuss strategies for ending the war in Ukraine and post-war planning. European nations have so far been left without a clear role in the peace talks. Choi Min-dang, Arirang News.
Now, Washington and Moscow appear to be getting closer on the back of their Ukraine war peacemaking negotiations. Will their renewed ties mean the end of the war? Let's turn to Professor Mason Ritchie. Thank you so much for joining us.
Great. Thank you for having me.
So how did the U.S. and Russia agree to normalize their ties all of a sudden, or is this not an all of a sudden development?
I don't think it's all of a sudden by any means, although I'm a bit surprised perhaps at how far things have gone so quickly. Not so much perhaps because of Trump, but rather some of the people around him who I thought would perhaps be at least a bit more of a break on Trump's efforts to reset relations with Russia. Trump has shown a long time streak of respect for Vladimir Putin as strong. We've known that for years and years. So I think he was predisposed to wanting to try to reset relations in this way. Obviously, Trump wants to solve the Ukraine-Russia war in a way that he thinks benefits himself politically and personally. It also cashes in on his campaign promise to end the war. That also allows his administration to turn, to other things that they would like to do internationally. And obviously, you can't solve the war in Ukraine without going through Russia. So I think all of those things sort of play into each other and help explain how it is that we've arrived where we're at.
Well, Russian President Vladimir Putin appears to be quite satisfied with the latest peace talks between Washington and Moscow. Now, what do you think that satisfied him about the negotiations this week? Trump pleasing Putin? What's your take on it?
My goodness, why would he not be satisfied? Putin's gotten pretty much everything he wanted and more.
Yeah.
What seems to be on the table, what we've heard right now, is that the United States isn't going to put troops on the ground, isn't going to provide much, if anything, in the way of security guarantees. Rather, it's going to be Europe that's going to be responsible for that. The United States is not apparently willing under Trump to open up a pathway for NATO membership. There are even rumors that the Trump administration has threatened to pull out some troops that it's added under the Biden administration on NATO's eastern flank. So those are all things that Putin wants, obviously, some things he probably didn't even think that he could get from the Trump administration. In addition to that, rhetorically, we've seen Trump spout the Russia line that Zelensky is a dictator, that Ukraine started the war, these obvious falsehoods, not agreeing to include in the G7 statement that Russia was the aggressor in the war. That's a diplomatic victory for Russia and a diplomatic loss for Ukraine and Europe, and frankly also for the reputation of the United States. And it looks like, in addition to all of that, NATO is fracturing. So this is the best day that Putin is, or the best week that Putin has had in years and years. Why would he not be happy?
Well, that's probably why they decided to, Trump and Putin decided to leave Ukraine and EU out of the talks, right?
Yeah, so there's a number of reasons why Ukraine has been perhaps left out of the talks. Frankly, part of the story is I think Trump has a personal dislike of Zelensky because ultimately his first impeachment was traced back to events in Ukraine and the way that Zelensky's government pushed back against some of the things that Trump wanted involving Hunter Biden and the Biden family. So there's a personal dimension of that. In addition to that, I think, as I said, Trump has a sort of unhealthy respect for Putin as a strong man, and he sees Zelensky as weak. I think he's got people in his ears, such as Tucker Carlson and others in his administration, who are Russia friendly for reasons that escape me. And in addition to that, ultimately having more people at the table makes it harder, right? So if you're going to have Ukraine at the table, if you're going to have Europe at the table, unless they can provide an excellent reason for why they have leverage that should make them be at the table, large powers are going to go over the head of the weak. The strong do what they can, the weak suffer what they must. And that, I think, is part of the equation for why we don't see yet, at least, Europe and Ukraine getting sufficient input into this quote-unquote peace process.
Well, Trump is now calling Zelensky a dictator. Now, you just mentioned their friendship is not the prettiest. What else is on Trump's mind?
What else is, well, I mean, obviously what's on Trump's mind, I think, in the first place is whatever he can get out of it personally. I think he wants to be rewarded with a Nobel Peace Prize. Right. I think he wants to feel like he's a big man who's the equal and strong man bona fides along with Putin and Xi Jinping. I think he does, and people in his administration do think that once they quote unquote solve this problem with the Russia-Ukraine war, that they'll be able to turn to other global issues. And including increasingly, I think, to East Asia, which has so far not really suffered very much from the Trump chaos and the Trump tornado. And I think somewhere in the back of his head and people around him, I think that there's an element of the Trump administration that is looking at some type of an attempt, at least, at some type of 19th century sphere of influence sort of relationship where the United States would end up with the Western Hemisphere, and Russia would have a sphere of influence in Europe, and then China would have its sphere of influence in Asia. So, I think that there's an attempt at a grand bargain that's perhaps coming around the corner at some point after this war is over as well.
Well, Trump has also, hinted hope of meeting Putin within February. If that does happen, that should be next week. If they do end up meeting next week, does that mean the end of the Ukraine war will come sooner than we expect?
That's hard to say. And it's also hard to say if they're going to get this meeting in by next week. The Kremlin spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, said the meeting may happen or this month, or it may not happen this month. But at some point, presumably, it will happen. It might be next week. It might be afterwards. I think there's quite a bit of work that probably needs to be done to prepare that, and whether or not the U.S. and Russia are capable of getting that done within the next few days in order to make it happen before the end of the month is a separate question. Presumably once a Putin-Trump meeting would take place, the things would accelerate in terms of trying to bring the war to a close. But in some ways, the war isn't over until Ukraine says it's over. Ukraine can keep fighting regardless of what the U.S. and Russia work out up until a certain point. Eventually they run out of troops, they run out of materiel, and unless the European Union can backfill the material that Ukraine would need, and unless Ukraine can find a way to conscript more people into their military, at some point, sooner rather than later, probably Ukraine runs out of the capacity to fight.
Definitely. All right, Professor Ritchie, thank you so much for connecting with us this morning. We appreciate it.
Great. Thank you for having me.
Now, moving on, a new North Korean sanctions monitoring mechanism held its very first meeting in Washington, D.C. this week. According to South Korea's foreign ministry on Friday, the Multilateral Sanctions Monitoring Team, which oversees the enforcement of sanctions against North Korea, met on Wednesday and urged all nations to join international efforts to maintain peace and security against ongoing threats from Pyongyang. Now, the team consists of 11 countries, including South Korea, the U.S., and Japan. It was formed last October after Russia vetoed the renewal of the UN panel of experts on North Korea. Though the team operates outside the UN system, it published reports detailing North Korea's violations of sanctions. And the first report, is set to be released by South Korea in the first half of this year. The Korea Trade Commission on Thursday made a preliminary decision to impose anti-dumping tariffs on Chinese thick steel plates. The watchdog will ask the Finance Ministry to impose a duty of up to 38%. Our Lee Seung-jae explains why.
Back in July of last year, Hyundai Steel filed a complaint with the government against low-priced Chinese thick steel plates. 3 months later, the Korea Trade Commission launched an investigation into the case. The nation's trade watchdog on Thursday made a preliminary decision to impose anti-dumping tariffs on thick steel plates being imported from China after identifying possible damage to the domestic industry. In its latest recommendation, the KTC will ask the Ministry of Economy and Finance to impose an anti-dumping duty of between 27.91% and 38.02%. The final decision on the levies is expected to be announced 5 months from now. The latest recommendation by the KTC comes amid the Trump administration's decision to impose 25% tariffs on all steel and aluminum imports starting next month. Economists say the higher tariff on steel and aluminum imports to the U.S. will lead to Chinese steel products being flooded into other regions, such as Europe and Southeast Asia, leading South Korean steelmakers to face tougher price competition. Experts also say the domestic steel industry has been hit hard due to oversupply from China and a slowdown in domestic demand. While the domestic demand for thick plates fell in 2023, the proportion of thick plates being imported from China has increased. Last year alone, Chinese imports accounted for 17% of all thick steel plate purchases in the country. The domestic thick plate market is estimated to be around 8 trillion won, or over $5.5 billion. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
An overseas research institute has forecast that South Korea's real GDP growth rate this year could fall to 1%. UK-based Capital Economics on Thursday lowered its forecast for South Korea's economic growth rate this year from 1.1% to just 1%. The institute cited the ongoing political turmoil and the slump in the real estate market. It added that due to the economic slowdown, the Bank of Korea is expected to lower the base interest rate by 1 percentage point this year. The average growth rate forecast by major overseas investment banks is 1.6%, with Capital Economics forecast being the lowest. AI ambitions are heating up globally, one being China's introduction of DeepSeek. Now, South Korea is also jumping into the AI race with the goal of developing its very own AI model. Our Moon Hae-ryun has more.
The South Korean government is launching an elite AI task force to develop a world-class large language model like ChatGPT or DeepSeek, aiming to compete with global leaders like the United States and China.
The global AI race is intensifying, but this is our opportunity. Now is the time for the public and private sectors to unite and fast-track South Korea's rise as a top 3 AI powerhouse.
On Thursday, Acting President and Deputy Prime Minister Choi Sang-mok announced the AI Computing Infrastructure Expansion Plan as he hosted the third AI Committee meeting, outlining a 3-pronged strategy, advancing next-generation AI models, expanding AI computing infrastructure, and accelerating AI-driven transformation. As part of the initiative, the government will establish a world's best LLM project, which will bring together top experts and provide high-performance computing resources to develop a world-class LLM within a short time frame. To support AI growth, the government is expanding computing infrastructure, with plans to acquire 18,000 graphic processing units by next year and increase the use of domestic AI semiconductors in national AI centers by 2030 to 50%. 1 trillion Korean won, around $700 million, will be committed to AI research to secure core technologies, and a global AI competition will be launched to attract talent. Beyond research, AI will be applied across a wide range of sectors, with the government planning to boost AI adoption among small businesses by 2027. To further encourage AI innovation, the government will offer tax credits for investments in research and development and AI infrastructure. Additionally, incentives will be provided for building AI data centers outside this whole metropolitan area, including priority access to power grid evaluations and diversified site options such as port and airport facilities. Acting President Choi stated that the government is committed to making South Korea a global AI powerhouse, and the country has the potential to be one. 문혜련, Arirang News.
Now, let's take a look at the stories from around the world with our Choi Ji-hee. Good morning, Ji-hee.
Good morning, Tommy.
So, Ji-hee, let's start in the Middle East. There were several bus explosions in Israel, which are suspected to be terrorist attacks. Tell us more.
Right. 3 buses exploded in Bat Yam, just south of Tel Aviv, on Thursday in what authorities are investigating as coordinated terror attacks. Now, no casualties, fortunately, have been reported. The explosions on 3 empty buses parked approximately 500 meters apart happened within minutes of each other and are believed to have been caused by makeshift explosive devices equipped with timers. 2 bombs were discovered on other buses but were defused by police. A note was found with one of the unexploded devices referencing revenge from Tulkarm, alluding to a recent Israeli military operation in the West Bank. In response to the incident, a temporary halt to all public transportation nationwide has been ordered to facilitate thorough investigations. Israel's internal security agency has taken over the investigation, and a search is underway for suspects. Meanwhile, Israel has received the bodies of what Hamas says are 4 hostages, including a mother and her 2 young children. But Israel says one of the bodies is of someone else. On Thursday, Hamas returned the remains of what were claimed to be Shiri Bibas, aged 32, and her 4-year-old and 9-month-old sons, along with Oded Lifshitz, an 84-year-old journalist. However, the Israel Defense Forces says that one of the sets of remains was not that of Shiri Bibas. The handover in Khan Yunis, Gaza, was marked by a provocative display by Palestinians, with coffins covered with offensive imagery and anti-Israel slogans. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu condemned the scene, calling Hamas monsters for their actions. In Tel Aviv's Hostages Square, thousands gathered to mourn the dead hostages who were abducted during the October 2023 attacks. U.S. National Security Advisor Mike Waltz said on Thursday during a press conference at the White House that all NATO members should allocate at least 2% of their gross domestic product to defense spending, a standard set in 2014. The call to action comes ahead of the NATO summit, slated for June, where defense budgets are expected to be a central topic of discussion. U.S. President Donald Trump has said that NATO member states should spend 5% of their GDP beyond the 2% guideline. Currently, 18 of NATO's 32 member countries meet or exceed the 2% GDP defense spending benchmark. However, several nations, including Canada, have yet to reach this target. Over in the United Kingdom, London Fashion Week Autumn-Winter 2025 has kicked off. The event, which runs until February 24th, features a mix of traditional runway shows and digital presentations, encompassing both established and emerging designers. This season, the British Fashion Council has introduced sustainability requirements for brands, emphasizing the industry's commitment to environmental responsibility. Participants include Harris Reed, who opened the week with a showcase, while Burberry is set to close the event on Monday evening. A pop-up shop to commercially support designers will also run from February 22nd to 24th.
If you stepped outside today, I'm sure you felt the familiar chill in the air. The colder than normal temperatures continue across much of the Korea. Strong winds are making it feel even colder than what the thermometer actually reads. Also, with dry air levels remaining high, staying hydrated and using a humidifier indoors can help keep your skin and throat from feeling too dry. Afternoon highs will be 1 to 4 degrees lower than yesterday, getting up to 1 degree in Seoul, 2 degrees in Seoul. Daejeon and Gwangju seeing highs of 5 degrees under mostly sunny skies with good air quality. Meanwhile, those planning to travel to West Coast regions this weekend need to be mindful of snow of up to 5 centimeters. However, Dokdo and Ulleungdo should continue to see massive amount of snow of up to 30 centimeters. Now, the rest of the country remains under sunny skies with the last stretch of chilly air this weekend. Then we should be swapping the heavy coats for something lighter next week.
That's all we have for our Friday edition of A New Day at Arirang. We will be back next Monday at the same time, 10 a.m. Korea time. Thanks for watching.